Hi, fifth grade scientists. Today you're going to need your notebook or a piece of paper and a pencil to take some notes with some new vocabulary words about ecosystems. So go grab it if you need to. Today I'm teaching you from the great redwood forests of Redwood National Park in California. Already in this chapter, you have learned that an ecosystem is a place where living and non-living things interact. And you have learned two vocabulary words. They are biotic and abiotic. This pine cone right here is a biotic thing. It came from a living thing. Biotic means it was living or once living. The other word that we learned was abiotic. This stuffed animal is abiotic. It was changed and made in a factory. I can't kill it. It doesn't need to eat. It is abiotic. Next, we learned about national parks. And national parks are a really special ecosystem. They are being saved for four reasons. First of all, for their beautiful scenery. Second, they're being saved so that wildlife has a place to live. The third reason they might be being saved is for historical reasons. And last, they are all being saved for the enjoyment of future generations. I'm going to share my screen with you today, and we're going to talk about eating in ecosystems. So what I want you to know is that every time you see words that are underlined, that's what you need to write. So our next section is called Finding Food in an Ecosystem. If you want to just write Finding Food, that would be okay as long as it's in your ecosystem chapter. So how things eat in an ecosystem. Let's get started. First of all, you don't have to write anything on this page, just listen. We depend on plants or animals that eat plants to give us our energy. This is called the food chain. Or better yet, the food web. The difference between the two is over here in this picture, a food chain is only one example. The caterpillar eats the plant. The frog eats the caterpillar, the snake eats the frog, and the owl eats the snake. That's just one example because we know that owls eat a lot more things than just a snake. And snakes eat things besides frogs. This is just one example, and that's called a food chain. But in the real world, the better word to use is a food web. This is an example of a food web. It's lots of lines, kind of like a spider web. So we know that the fox over here, if we looked at it, the fox likes to eat rabbits, and the fox would eat a chipmunk, and the fox would eat a mouse. But if the fox is really hungry, it would eat an insect. And if an owl was on the ground, the fox would probably eat the owl also. And the deer eats a tree and the deer eats the plants, and all of these lines interact, and that's how nature really works. It's called a food web. A food chain is just one example. You don't have to write anything here either. This just tells you that energy is flowing through all ecosystems, which means things have to eat in order to get energy. If we look at this chart here, plants make their own food. And so there are lots of plants in an ecosystem. If you look out your window right now, you're going to see plants. Because plants make their own food, they are everywhere. The next group of animals are the ones that eat plants. And because there's so many plants to eat, there are a lot of animals in this group. But as we go to the animals that eat meat, like these up here, like the eagle and the snake, there are less of those type of animals because there's less energy for them to eat. Energy is what we need in order to survive. Let's go on. You will need to write what's underlined here, and that is that a producer is an organism that makes its own food. I hope you remember that from the first day of science, that a plant is a producer because it makes its own food. Plants don't depend on finding their own food to eat. They make their own food. If you remember, they need water and carbon dioxide that's changed by light energy, and they make glucose, which is their food, and they make oxygen, which is used to break down the glucose before it's given off for us to breathe. So all of these are examples of plants that make their own food, and they are called producers. Every ecosystem has producers. Your national park has producers or plants that grow in your national park. The next things that are in an ecosystem are things called consumers. We are a consumer because we are an organism that will eat other organisms for energy. So what it's really saying is if you have to eat and you have a mouth, then you are a consumer. Consumers eat different types of things. So when you look at the picture here, these are all consumers. They all have a mouth and they all need to eat, but they eat different things. So there are different types of consumers. This cow here eats something very different than the snake does. This bear eats things that are different than the frog eats. The wolf eats different things than the rabbit does. This butterfly eats things differently than the bird over here does. Isn't that a cool butterfly? It's called the 88 butterfly because of the pattern on its wings looking like 88. Now you can tell what an animal eats really by looking at its mouth and the type of teeth that it has. So if this wolf were to show us his teeth, they were long and sharp, and they are used for ripping and tearing food. So we know that a wolf eats different things than a cow who has very flat teeth that uses its teeth for grinding up its food that it eats. So a consumer has to eat. Today we're going to learn about types of consumers. So write down kinds of consumers, and we'll talk about the very first one. The first type of consumer is called a herbivore. Some people pronounce this herbivore, which makes the H silent. Either one is correct. A herbivore eats only plants. These kind of animals are not going to have sharp, pointed, long teeth for ripping and tearing. Their teeth are going to be more flat, like our molars in the back. They're used for grinding their food. All of these animals here are only plant eaters. A deer is not going to chase down an animal and hunt and kill it to eat it. A rabbit isn't going to be a hunter either. All of these animals eat only plants. They're called herbivores. Can you think of some other herbivores? Almost all the animals in the deer family are herbivores. Elk and moose. Animals that live on farms like cows and horses are herbivores. They are the plant eaters. Next along comes a carnivore. So a carnivore is an animal that eats only meat. Their mouth is made for eating meat. And so if you look at the eagle there, they have that sharp hooked curved beak because they eat other living things like fish and small rodents. A wolf is a carnivore. A snake, all snakes are carnivores. They eat only meat. I would never try and give popcorn a piece of lettuce to eat because popcorn is made for eating only meat. Can you think of other carnivores? Our next type of consumer is called an omnivore. These creatures eat both plants and meat. They're very adaptable. They eat plants and fruits, and they also eat meat. So a fox in that first picture there is an omnivore. He would prefer to eat meat, but a fox will get into a garbage can, or a fox will eat some berries once in a while. A robin there in the middle, his favorite food to eat is a worm, which is considered meat. But it also loves to eat mulberries and other fruit from plants. So it's an omnivore. And a crow will eat almost anything. It will get into a garbage dumpster. It will eat roadkill. It will eat berries and corn. So it's an omnivore. And down there, if you're a Twins fan, you may recognize Joe Mauer. Joe Mauer used to play for the Twins, and he's an omnivore. So just like myself, you may eat a cheeseburger or a taco once in a while, but you'll also have an apple or a salad. Those are all examples of omnivores. They eat both plants and meats. Number 4 is a group called the scavengers. The scavengers eat things called carrion. Carrion are things that are dead, or if it's a plant, it's decaying. So a scavenger waits till something has died and then eats it. It doesn't hunt it down and eat it. It waits till it's dead before eating it. Eagles, as you may remember, are carnivores, but they're also scavengers. An eagle would love to go down in a ditch and eat meat from a dead deer. This is called in the middle a burying beetle. It waits till and finds an animal that's dead and then it eats it. This raven here, it would eat any type of roadkill that it would find. It's a scavenger. Hyenas will follow the lions and tigers in Africa and wait till they kill the animals, and then they will eat what's left over. This is also a type of beetle called a dung beetle, and a dung beetle you may have heard of. What they like to do is take decaying things, especially poop from animals, and they roll it up into a little ball, and they roll that little poop ball back to their home, and they eat it later. So a scavenger is something that waits till something dies before they eat it. Let's go on to the next thing, and it's called an insectivore. An insectivore, its name tells you what it eats. An insectivore eats only insects. Now, insects are considered meat because they're not plants. Worms are also considered meat. So an insectivore eats only insects. So the pictures there show you a bat. Now, some bats are fruit bats. This is a little brown bat, and it only eats insects. Spiders are something that is an insectivore. A spider only eats insects. Can you think of any other insectivores? Maybe an anteater or types of frogs? They would also be considered an insectivore. Finally, to end our food chain in an ecosystem are the decomposers. The decomposers are things that crawl up out of the ground when something has died, and they feed on the dead, decaying things or animal waste, which means like the poop from the animal. And they use these things to put nutrients back into the environment. Most of them are bacteria or fungus, like the mushroom in the picture there. Now, these are different than scavengers. Decomposers help make new soil by putting those dead, decaying things back as nutrients into the soil. So they help make our soils better. So decomposers are important to help clean up the environment by, for example, the fungus there, turning an old tree that's fallen down in the forest, turning it back into good soil again so that new plants can grow there. So a decomposer ends a food chain. So there you have it. That is the lesson on eating or food in an ecosystem. I hope you learned something new.